The new student. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Elite Martial Arts Academy as Edith Simmons carefully parked her modest sedan between two gleaming SUVs. At 72, she moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned to make every movement count. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore a crisp white kimono that had seen decades of training. Inside her weathered gym bag lay her most treasured possession, a faded black belt with frayed edges, earned under the tutelage of Master Hiroshi Takahashi over 25 years ago. Few people knew about Edith's remarkable journey in Jiu-Jitsu. She had been one of the rare women to earn her black belt in the 1980s, quietly continuing her training while raising two children and supporting her husband's career as a school principal. 3 weeks had passed since her husband's funeral, and moving to this suburban community was her attempt at starting fresh. The modest apartment felt empty without his laughter, but Edith refused to surrender to grief. At her age, staying active wasn't just a choice, it was survival. The academy's reception area buzzed with energy as young athletes prepared for their training sessions. The receptionist, a woman in her 20s with perfectly styled hair, looked up with barely concealed skepticism as Edith approached the front desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting doubt that the elderly woman had arrived at the right place. "Yes, I'm interested in joining your jiu-jitsu program," Edith replied, her voice clear and unwavering. The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly. "Our adult classes are quite intensive. Perhaps you'd be interested in our senior yoga sessions on Tuesday mornings?" Edith smiled patiently. "I've been practicing jiu-jitsu for over 40 years, dear. I'm looking for a place to continue my training." A flicker of disbelief crossed the receptionist's face, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "Well, we do have an open mat session starting in 15 minutes. New students can observe and then speak with one of our instructors about placement." "That sounds perfect," Edith replied, signing the waivers with a steady hand while ignoring the receptionist's barely concealed skepticism. As she walked toward the changing area, she could feel the young woman's eyes following her, no doubt wondering what an old lady was doing in a competitive jiu-jitsu academy. Edith smiled to herself, it certainly wouldn't be the first time she'd been underestimated. The main training floor was impressive, spacious, well-lit, with state-of-the-art equipment and pristine mats. About 20 students were already warming up, their sharp, energetic movements accompanied by the characteristic sounds of bare feet pivoting on mats and controlled breathing. Edith stood at the edge of the training area, taking in the scene with an experienced eye. The techniques being practiced were familiar fundamentals she had drilled thousands of times. She noted the clean execution, the attentive coaching, and the respectful atmosphere. It seemed like a solid academy, exactly what she'd been hoping to find. Then she spotted him. The humiliation. Coach Adam Jackson commanded the room with an arrogance that bordered on theatrical. In his mid-30s, tall and powerfully built, he wore his achievements like armor, competition patches covering his blue kimono, his black belt tied with meticulous precision. He moved through the room with the confidence of someone who had never faced real adversity, correcting stances and receiving nods of deference from his students. When Jackson's gaze finally landed on Edith, he froze momentarily. His expression shifted from surprise to something resembling cruel amusement. He said something to a nearby student, a muscular young man with a purple belt, who glanced at Edith and snickered. Undeterred, Edith stepped onto the mat and bowed, following traditional dojo etiquette. The chatter in the room gradually diminished as more students noticed the elderly woman in the white kimono. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Coach Jackson called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "I think you might have wandered into the wrong class. Senior Tai Chi is in the small studio down the hall." A wave of suppressed laughter rippled through the room. Several students pulled out their phones, sensing entertainment. Edith remained composed, her expression neutral. "I'm here for the jiu-jitsu class," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "I recently moved to town and I'm looking for a new place to train." Jackson exchanged glances with several of his senior students, his smile widening. "Train? At your age?" He made no attempt to hide his incredulity. No offense, ma'am, but Jiu-Jitsu is a physically demanding combat sport. We focus on competition-level training here. I'm aware of what Jiu-Jitsu involves, Edith replied calmly. I've been practicing since 1980. This elicited more muffled laughter from the class. Jackson's smile turned condescending. Look, Grandma, he said, emphasizing the word to draw more snickers from his students. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't a beginner-friendly environment. We don't have time to teach basics to someone who might hurt themselves. The word, grandma, hung in the air like a slap. Several students were now openly recording with their phones, expecting to capture an embarrassing moment they could share later. Edith remained still, her eyes fixed on Jackson. I understand your concern, but I assure you I can manage. Can you even get up from the ground without help? Called out one of the blue belts, causing another wave of laughter. Jackson raised his hand, silencing the class, though his own amusement was evident. What belt do you claim to be? He asked, emphasizing claim with obvious skepticism. I don't claim anything, Edith replied, unruffled by his tone. I earned my second-degree black belt under Master Hiroshi Takahashi in 1995. The name meant nothing to most of the students, but Jackson's expression flickered momentarily. Takahashi was a legendary figure in certain circles, though he had never sought mainstream recognition. Well, Jackson recovered quickly, his smirk returning. I'm sure things were different back then. Standards have evolved considerably. He gestured toward the door with exaggerated courtesy. Why don't you observe today's class from the visitors area? That might help you decide if this is really suitable for someone of your experience. The dismissal was clear, delivered with a veneer of professional concern that couldn't quite mask the underlying mockery. Several students were openly grinning now, clearly enjoying the spectacle of the old woman being put in her place. But Edith Simmons hadn't spent 4 decades on the mat to be dismissed so easily. The challenge. I didn't come to watch, Edith said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that momentarily silenced the room. I came to train. Coach Jackson's patronizing smile faltered slightly. He hadn't expected pushback from the elderly woman. Around the room, students exchanged glances, their amusement now tinged with curiosity. Ma'am, Jackson began, his tone deliberately patient as if explaining something to a child, we have liability concerns. Our insurance doesn't cover. Your insurance covers anyone who signs the waivers, Edith interrupted smoothly. Which I did. And your own promotional materials advertise that you welcome martial artists of all backgrounds. The accuracy of her statement caught Jackson off guard. He glanced toward the reception area, where the posted academy mission statement indeed proclaimed their commitment to inclusive training. This is ridiculous, muttered the purple belt student. She's going to get hurt and then sue us. Jackson seized on this. Exactly. Look, I'm trying to be respectful here, but you're putting yourself and our academy at risk. What happens when you can't keep up? When someone accidentally injures you during sparring? Then that would be my responsibility, Edith replied. Just as it is for any other student. The room fell silent. Jackson found himself in an uncomfortable position. His public dismissal of the elderly woman was being met with calm, logical responses that exposed the weakness of his arguments. Fine, Jackson said, his voice hardening. If you're so confident, let's settle this properly. He stepped closer to Edith, towering over her smaller frame. I'll give you one chance to prove you belong here. A friendly spar, just to assess your skill level, you understand. Several students shifted uncomfortably. They recognized the predatory gleam in their instructor's eyes. Jackson was known for his ego and his intolerance for being challenged. Against who? Edith asked, though she already suspected the answer. Jackson's smile returned, cold and calculating. Against me. If you can hold your own for 60 seconds without tapping out or getting submitted, you can stay and train. If not, you leave quietly and don't come back. Coach, one of the senior students whispered, maybe someone else should. No, Jackson cut him off. She wants to train with the big boys. Let's see what Master Takahashi taught her. The mocking emphasis he placed on the name made several students wince. Even they could sense the line being crossed. Edith studied Jackson for a long moment. At 43 years old, he outweighed her by at least 60 pounds and had the physical advantages of youth and strength. But she had seen his type before, gym bullies who confused aggression with skill, who had never learned the deeper lessons that martial arts were meant to teach. 60 seconds, she asked. 60 seconds, Jackson confirmed. Starting from standing position. If you get taken down and controlled, it's over. If you tap out, it's over. If you can't escape a submission, it's over. The terms were heavily weighted in his favor, designed to ensure her failure. The other students watched in fascination and growing discomfort. Some pulled out their phones again, though now their expressions were more troubled than amused. Edith removed her shoes and stepped fully onto the mat. Very well, she said simply. Jackson began stretching, making a show of loosening up his shoulders and rolling his neck. Don't worry, Grandma, he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. I'll go easy on you. Wouldn't want to hurt you on your first day. But as Edith took her position across from him, something shifted in her demeanor. The polite, patient elderly woman seemed to fade away, replaced by something harder, more focused. Her stance subtly changed, her weight settling into a balanced position that spoke of decades of muscle memory. For just a moment, Jackson's confidence wavered as he met her eyes. There was something there, a depth of knowledge and experience that his younger students lacked. But he quickly dismissed the feeling. She was still just an old woman, after all. Ready? He asked, raising his hands. Edith nodded once, her expression now completely neutral. Begin, shouted one of the students. Jackson immediately shot forward, intending to overwhelm her with his superior size and strength. It was exactly what Edith had expected. The 10-second lesson. Jackson charged forward like a bull, his hands reaching for Edith's shoulders with the intent to muscle her to the ground through sheer force. It was a textbook display of what Master Takahashi had always called Western aggression, all power, no finesse. Edith didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped slightly to her left, her movement so fluid it seemed almost casual. As Jackson's momentum carried him past her center line, she caught his extended arm with a grip that felt like steel cables despite her age. In one seamless motion, she pivoted on her left foot, using his own forward energy against him. The throw was a thing of beauty, a perfect ippon sui nage that Master Takahashi would have been proud of. Jackson's feet left the ground as his own momentum, now redirected, sent him flying through the air. He hit the mat with a thunderous impact that shook the floor and knocked the wind from his lungs. But Edith wasn't finished. Before Jackson could even process what had happened, she had followed him to the ground. Her knee found the precise spot on his solar plexus that would keep him breathless, while her hands moved with practiced efficiency. She threaded her arm under his chin, her bicep and forearm creating a triangle against the sides of his neck. The rear naked choke was locked in with 40 years of experience behind it. Tap, she said quietly, her voice barely audible to Jackson but carrying clearly across the stunned silent dojo. Jackson's eyes bulged as he realized his predicament. The blood supply to his brain was being methodically cut off by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. His hands clawed at her arm, but her positioning was perfect, there was no escape. The entire sequence had taken exactly 10 seconds. Tap, Edith repeated, her tone remaining calm and almost conversational. Jackson's survival instincts finally overcame his ego. He tapped frantically against her arm, the rapid pats echoing through the silent dojo like gunshots. Edith released the choke immediately and rolled away from him, coming smoothly to her feet while Jackson gasped and coughed on the mat. She straightened her kimono with the same deliberate care she had shown when folding it that morning. The dojo remained frozen in shocked silence. 20 students stood transfixed, their phones capturing what had just become the most spectacular display of technique any of them had ever witnessed. The arrogant coach who had publicly humiliated an elderly woman lay on his back, his face red with embarrassment and oxygen deprivation. Jackson slowly struggled to his feet, his legs still shaky. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the confused disorientation of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. "That's impossible," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "What's impossible?" Edith asked, her voice returning to its earlier patient tone. "That someone my age could have skill. That 40 years of training might mean something. Or that you could be wrong about someone you met 5 minutes ago." Several students shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in her words. They had all participated in her humiliation, and now they were seeing the result of their collective arrogance. Jackson opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in years, he found himself without words. "You said 60 seconds, Edith continued. "I believe I had 50 left." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of students who had been laughing at her minutes earlier. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue with the class. Unless, of course, you still think I need to observe from the visitors area." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jackson stood in the center of his own dojo, thoroughly defeated, while an elderly woman waited patiently for his answer. The purple belt student who had earlier questioned whether she could get up from the ground without help now stared at her with something approaching awe. Around the room, phones were still recording, but the footage they were capturing would tell a very different story than anyone had expected. The new teacher. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Jackson stood in the center of his own dojo, his earlier confidence replaced by a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something else, reluctant respect. The students around the room remained frozen, unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. Finally, Jackson cleared his throat. I apologize," he said, his voice much quieter than before. "That was impressive." Edith nodded graciously. "Thank you. Your form is quite good, by the way. You have excellent conditioning and your fundamentals are solid. But you rely too heavily on strength over technique." The casual critique from someone who had just effortlessly defeated him made several students suppress smiles. Jackson, to his credit, actually listened. "Master Takahashi always taught that Jiu-Jitsu is about making the impossible possible," Edith continued. "A smaller person defeating a larger one, experience overcoming youth, technique triumphing over brute force. That's the art we practice." "I've heard of Master Takahashi," Jackson admitted. "His students, they were legendary. But I thought. You thought they were all gone?" Edith smiled. "We're not all museum pieces yet, young man." A few students chuckled nervously, and the tension in the room began to ease. "Would you?" Jackson paused, clearly struggling with his words. "Would you be willing to show us that throw? I've never seen it executed quite like that." Edith looked around the room at the faces that had been mocking her just minutes before. Now they showed genuine curiosity and respect. "I'd be happy to. But first, I think we should address something." She walked to the center of the mat, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the dojo. "How many of you recorded what just happened?" About half the students raised their hands sheepishly. "I want you to keep those videos," she said, surprising them. "But before you share them, I want you to think about why you were recording in the first place. Were you hoping to capture my failure? My humiliation?" The uncomfortable shuffling of feet provided her answer. "I've been underestimated my entire life," Edith continued. "First for being a woman in a male-dominated sport, then for being older. Each time, I had to prove myself not just once, but over and over again. The real lesson here isn't about technique or throws or submissions." She looked directly at Jackson. "It's about respect. About not judging someone's worth based on their appearance or age or gender. About understanding that every person who walks through those doors has something to teach and something to learn." Jackson nodded slowly. "You're right. I was completely out of line. To you and to anyone else who might be watching. He turned to address his students. We all were. Apology accepted, Edith said simply. Now, shall we train? The next hour was unlike any class the academy had ever held. Edith moved through the room like a master craftsman, demonstrating techniques with precision and patience. She worked with students of all levels, offering gentle corrections and sharing insights gained from 4 decades on the mat. Jackson found himself learning alongside his own students, his ego sufficiently humbled to accept instruction from someone who clearly outclassed him in both skill and wisdom. Mrs. Simmons, he said as the class wound down, would you consider, that is, we'd be honored if you'd join our academy permanently. Not as a student, he added quickly, but as an instructor. I think we could all learn a great deal from you. Edith smiled, the first truly warm expression she'd shown since arriving. I think I'd like that very much. As the students filed out, many stopped to bow respectfully to Edith and apologize for their earlier behavior. The purple belt who had questioned her ability to get up from the ground approached last. Ma'am, he said, his face red with embarrassment, I'm really sorry about what I said earlier. That was completely disrespectful. Thank you for your apology, Edith replied. But remember, this is how we grow. We make mistakes, we learn from them, and we become better people. 6 months later, Elite Martial Arts Academy had gained a reputation as one of the most welcoming and skilled dojos in the state. Students traveled from surrounding cities to train under the legendary Master Edith, whose patient instruction and profound knowledge had transformed the academy's culture entirely. Jackson, his arrogance tempered by wisdom, had become one of her most dedicated students. The viral video of their first encounter, which had been viewed millions of times, was now used as a teaching tool about respect, humility, and the dangers of assumptions. And every morning, Edith would arrive at the academy with the same deliberate precision she had shown that first day, her weathered gym bag containing not just her faded black belt, but 40 years of knowledge she was finally able to share with a new generation of martial artists who had learned to see beyond appearances. On the wall of the academy, a new sign hung beside the mission statement, judge not the warrior by their age, but by their spirit. Below it, in smaller text, was a quote from Master Takahashi, the greatest victories are not won on the mat, but in the transformation of the heart. The end.